Hey, what's up, everybody? It's Tony from Drinks and Opinions. It's another review for Night Court, Episode 4, Dan versus Dating. This was a very Dan centric episode, more or less. Going into Dan getting back into dating since his wife had passed. You know what the time frame was? I'm assuming a few years, probably. So he hasn't dated since the point when he got married, up until this point, basically. Even from when his wife died until that point, he hadn't dated. So Dan's been out of the loop for a while. It was a very good episode, I have to say. I think out of all of them, this is probably the best episode because it seems like Night Court's starting to find its footing. What works for it, what doesn't work. Big thing I think they have improved on, in my opinion, would be Gergs. Because in the first episode or two, they had Gergs acting like Roz and Bull all at the same time. Funny, goofy, but then would have a serious moment. Or several serious moments, which I just didn't think was working. I thought they were just asking too much of that character. But in this one, they more are aiming towards the comedic bull aspect, I think, from how I'm seeing it with her character. So they're basically finding one thing and having her do it. I'm not saying she won't have her serious moments. Bull had his serious moments. But all in all, I think with the character of Gergs, they've improved on it. Olivia was in this as well. There was several scenes between Gergs and Olivia that I think went pretty well. I think Olivia's improved. Her likability from the first episode has definitely improved because I was not a fan of her character at first. So to me, it feels like with those two characters that they're finding what worked for them. And I think it's working well, and I think it's slowly improving. Obviously, like I've stated before, this is not the original Night Court, and I went into this expecting it not to be like the original Night Court. Like I've said before, it's a different time. Also, 30 plus years since the show had originally aired, or last aired, correction, till now. So Dan obviously has changed since this was a Dan centric episode. Dan's he's more subdued, more quiet, not the old Dan we know. And this episode kind of showed it. And it showed more of the humanity part of Dan when it comes to dating, getting back into relationships. And I think they did a really good job with it. You know, they're showing Dan as more of a matured man, still referring back to stuff he did when he was younger in the original Night Court until now. There is a difference with them, the maturity factor, like I've said, which at first I was a little iffy about. But I think they're doing a good job with it. Don't get me wrong, I'd still like to see some of the old Dan back. I know we're not going to get all of it, but I would like to see a little bit of the old Dan back. Some of the innuendos, things like that. They don't have to go full bore Dan because I get he's 75 in real life and his character's 75, so it makes sense that he would be a little bit more mature. And if he came off too creepy in the show like old Dan was, it would probably just come off as the creepy old man sort of thing. And I don't necessarily know if that would work because it would come off as, well, besides creepy, super creepy. And I just don't know if that would work. I'm not saying it wouldn't work. It could work if written properly. But I know I did read an article. John Larroquette was interviewed, and he said it was part of the reason why he came back to Night Court was because they made his character not as perverted as he was, let's be honest. Not as forward with women, so on and so forth. And he said that was a big reason why he came back. And I actually read the article today ran into it by accident. So that kind of explained why they were doing what they were doing with his character. Which I don't have an issue with because I get, as time goes on, you mature. But back to the episode. It was a very good episode. Dan was getting hit on by his client, which was actually really funny in the beginning of the show. She kept flirting with him nonstop, then grabbed his butt. Dan freaked out. Judge Stone was trying to help him by getting him away from her, calling him to the bench. And as you could tell how uncomfortable Dan was with what went on. Back in the day, Dan wouldn't have been uncomfortable with that. As the show went on, like I said, they had some scenes with Gergs and Olivia where they were basically having to share an office because I assume Olivia didn't have an office. So her and Gergs were sharing one. And Olivia just couldn't wait to get out of it because Olivia's not a people person. Just not. Gergs is. Then it turns out Gergs likes Olivia and admitted it to her. And Olivia was a little shocked by that because she just doesn't do well with people. And I think they're starting to show they're building a relationship between Gergs and Olivia in this episode, albeit small, but they're still showing some of it, that they're starting to get along with each other and become friends. And I'm okay with that. Again, they're seeing what's working, what's not, and they're finding what's starting to work for this new series. They still have to do their own thing. Dan ended up running into some lady and decided to go on a date after being bugged by everybody. Texted her. Was going to take her out to dinner later in the show as it went on. And Judge Stone and Neil's still annoying, but I think they're starting to tone his annoyance down a little bit, how annoying he is, which I'm grateful for. Thank you. So he's starting to become a little more tolerable. But Dan ends up going on a date at a restaurant. So Judge Stone and Neil end up showing up there. Just to spy, be nosy. Same thing Judge Harry Stone would have done. Mac would have done it. Bull would have been right with them. They all would have done the same thing. So again, it's harkening back to the original series with that. And they find out that Dan's by himself. And at first they thought maybe she was in the bathroom or just arriving late. And they sit down and talk to her. And Dan basically comes out and says he never actually texted her. He had to text on his phone, like he said he was going to do earlier in this show, in this episode, but he never did it. And it was still on his phone. And he showed Judge Stone and Neil the text, and Neil, like a genius, accidentally hit send by mistake. Sended it right to the lady. And her name was Julianne, I think is what it was. And she ends up texting back almost immediately. Be there in 5 minutes. So Judge Stone and Neil are like, okay, we're going to leave. And Dan's like, nope, you're staying with me. Because Dan's super nervous because he hasn't been on a date since his wife died. Actually, he hadn't been on a date since he got married to his wife. So he's been out of the game for a long time. And the lady shows up and they're talking and Dan's starting to get a little nervous. And Judge Stone accidentally spilled some water on his dress clothes. He was wearing a suit. So him and Neil go to the bathroom so I can clean up. And Judge Stone, being nosy like she always is, she's like her father, maybe a little more so, talks to the lady and the lady comes out. No, she doesn't want a relationship, Dan. She just wants a friend with benefits. And Judge Stone's just completely surprised by that. Dan ends up coming back and Judge Stone tries to tell him what Julianne said. And Dan he was zoning out because he's so nervous that he didn't want to hear what she had to say. So he goes back to his dinner with her. They end up back in his house, his apartment a little bit later. And this is where it gets interesting. And she's coming on to him hard. Probably more so harder than Dan probably even would have in the 80s. Way more aggressive. And she's coming on to him and, oh, let's go to the bedroom. Let's do this. And Dan starts talking and goes, hey, I haven't been with anybody. It's been a long time. Dan's really uncomfortable because he's been out of it for a long time and he just doesn't know how to respond to that anymore. And I'm sure he's probably thinking about his wife too. Well, this lady starts laughing. And Dan's just kind of like, what are you laughing at? Kind of look. Turns out she knew Dan from 30 plus years ago. Dan was the prosecutor then and prosecuted her on a case, and she wanted revenge. And it wasn't only Dan she wanted revenge on. It was quite a few people, apparently. And not just people at the court. And she ends up just laughing even more and ends up giving Dan his wallet back and basically looks down on him, how he's behaving. Basically thinking, I can't break this guy down anymore, which is what she was wanting to do. Break him down, destroy him, ruin him. She realized she can't do that anymore. And looks at him and goes, you're pathetic, basically, and I'm a sociopath. Well, she didn't say sociopath. She said clinically insane. And leaves. Boom, out the door. So that scene there was really showing how Dan had changed. How he had grown up, matured. Because we all know 30 plus years ago, Dan would have been all over it. And he's just not like that now. So as a 75-year-old man, he has grown as an individual. Then as the show comes to an end, Dan starts explaining what happened to Judge Stone and They're sitting in the cafeteria and they start bonding, like Harry and Dan bonded. Even though Dan would never admit they bonded, they were bonded. They were probably the bestest of friends. And he started bonding with Judge Stone, Harry's daughter. They're starting to have the connection that Harry and Dan had, and they're starting to build up with the new Judge Stone and Dan now. So that being said, like I said, it was a good episode. I actually enjoyed it. I think it was probably the best episode so far. Granted, we're only 4 in, so it could go completely downhill from here. But as of right now, I like this episode the best out of all of them. Because it's shown the growth of Dan. It's shown how Dan has changed. How Dan has matured. How Dan's missed his wife and how uncomfortable he is with getting back into the dating scene. And then with that lady, I'm sure that probably maybe have set him back a little bit. Who wouldn't when you find out that they're clinically insane and trying to destroy you? But all in all, I would recommend this episode. I enjoyed it. I liked it. I wish we'd have a little bit of the old Dan back. And at some point, I hope we get Bull back. Even if a couple cameos here and there, I would love to see Bull. That being said, thank you for watching this review of Night Court Episode 4. Thank you. And remember to like and subscribe, and I will see y'all later. Thank you.